Today we'll be looking at Statistical Release P0307, Marriages and Divorces from Statistics South Africa. These are the numbers for 2022, released in March 2024. This is an annual release with the next release expected in March 2025 for the 2023 numbers. So unlike previous videos where I took some data from the release and generated a Power BI visualization, this will be more of a commentary on the release. So let's begin. So the release is divided into two sections, the marriages section and divorces section, with the marriages section further divided into three sections. That is civil marriages, which are marriages between a man and a woman, then customary marriages, which are meant to recognize the fact that in certain cultures in South Africa, we allow for polygamous marriage. So we recognize those in the form of customary marriages, and we have civil unions, which recognize same-sex marriages. But yeah, you are allowed to enter into a civil union if you are of different sexes. So this is also for people who want to get married in a less, religious kind of way. Anyways. Okay, starting off with the first section on civil marriages. We see that civil marriages have seen a generally downward trend from 2013 to 2022, with a sharp decline from 2019 to 2020, and then a rebound. That's pretty expected due to the COVID-19 pandemic and restrictions on gatherings. We also see that the most popular month to get married in South Africa has been December, so the festive season. The release also has marriage data, registered marriage data, broken up in terms of provinces. And as expected, we see provinces like the Western Cape, Gauteng, and KwaZulu-Natal having the most number of registered marriages. This is expected because those are the most populous provinces in the country. We also have a breakdown of civil marriages by the age differences between spouses and also their marital status at the time of marriage. From this, we see that generally we have that bridegrooms are older than their brides. So this is not unexpected, culturally speaking. And we do see some deviations, with 45.8% of marriages between never married men and divorced women being between older women and younger men, and also a significant deviation with divorced men and widowed women, where 21.7% of cases we have the wife older than the groom. Okay, that's that. So when it comes to never married men and women, the most popular age bracket to get married in 2022 was the age bracket of 30 to 34 years old. So that's the case for both men and women. and looking at the age at the time of civil marriage, the median age of brides and bridegrooms, we have for 2022 that the median age for bridegrooms was 38 and the median age for brides was 34. This carries on from the previously mentioned point of bridegrooms generally being older than brides. And looking at the data from 2018 to 2022, we see that bridegrooms generally get married in the later 30s, while brides generally get married in the earlier 30s. Moving on to customary marriages, we see a general downtrend in customary marriages from 2013 to 2020. Obviously, the sharp decrease from 2029 to 2020 being a result of the COVID pandemic and associated restrictions. But we also see a massive recovery from 2020 to 2022 in customary marriages. In fact, actually bumping above all other years. So customary marriages are actually the highest they've been since 2013. So there's also breakdowns in terms of the age difference between brides and bridegrooms and the age group distribution. Looking at the province breakdown, we see that we have the most customary marriages in the provinces of the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, and Mpumalanga, and the least numbers in Gauteng and the Western Cape. This contextually makes sense with the more rural provinces having more customary marriages relative to your more urban Gauteng and Western Cape. It is noted that the results or the data does not actually distinguish between first wives and second wives in terms of a customary marriage. So it seems that a customary marriage, whether one is the first, second, or third wife, etc., is simply just registered as a customary marriage. But yeah, it would be interesting to have such data, but yeah, the report does mention that we do not collect such data. Okay, on to the third subsection of civil unions. Civil unions registered in South Africa from 2013 to 2022. These are on a general uptrend. In terms of the provinces, we see the most number of civil unions registered in Gauteng and the Western Cape. Yes, also, the civil unions being more of a mirror of the customary marriages, with now in this case having the more urban provinces getting the higher number of civil unions and the more rural provinces showing lower numbers in civil unions. In terms of age distribution for civil unions, this mirrors the data in in terms of age distribution for civil unions, this mirrors those of regular marriages, with the most popular age bracket being 30 to 34 for both spouse 1 and spouse 2. Yes, I did have a bit of an issue with this spouse one, spouse two thing because it doesn't seem relevant if they don't record the gender. I mean, unless there is a difference between spouse one and spouse two, but there does not seem to be difference. It seems to simply be numbering. So I think a more interesting data set would probably be uh, data between in terms of civil unions and how many civil unions are between male and male, how many between female and female, and how many between male female. Then that would be interesting data to have a look at. But simply labeling them spouse one, spouse two, and not recording the gender, I feel it it makes splitting data into spouse one, spouse two irrelevant unless there's a genuine difference between the two. In terms of age groups, the average age of spouse one in 2022 was 35, and the average age of spouse two was 33. For some strange reason, from 2018 to 2022, the average age of spouse two has been consistently lower than the average age of spouse one. So this is again to the point of what's the difference between spouse one and spouse two, if there is any. Otherwise, this is just a statistical illusion. Now we have a small section on all marriages and unions, which shows that the number of marriages from 2013 to 2022 has dropped by 27.3%. We also have the crude marriage rate for this period, which is the number of marriages per 1,000 persons. And in 2022, we had 2 marriages per 1,000. Moving on to divorces, we are also given the number of divorces and crude divorce rate, this time split by population group. Now, this graph also highlights the importance of proportionality as represented by the crude rate here. So in this case, in the case of divorces, it's given per 100,000 and not per 1,000 persons of the population. But an illustration of why one would need to have proportional rates as opposed to simply looking at absolute numbers is that if you look at the divorces by population group and you simply look at the absolute numbers and we rank them from most divorced population group to least divorced population group, we have that the ranking would go Black African followed by white followed by colored and then Indian/Asian. But if we were to look at this from the perspective of the more proportional crude rate, then the ranking from most divorced to least divorced would go white, then colored, then Indian/Asian, and then Black African. So from the absolute perspective and the proportional perspective, you get two very different stories. And yes. Now we also have some data on characteristics of plaintiffs, so who's filing for divorce split by the province. So in total we have 33.2% of divorces being filed by husbands in 2022, 55.8% by wives, and the rest being made by both or unspecified. In terms of these numbers, I would say that the ratio is actually more balanced than I initially thought. So I'd say it's more balanced than what is displayed or implied in the media. Wives still file for more divorces than husbands, but personally looking at the numbers, I had a more unbalanced impression from the media than this. I had a more 2080 kind of impression before looking at these numbers. And we also have number and percentage distribution of divorces by occupation. Here we note that a large number of people didn't really specify what their occupation was when filing for divorce. We also have a large proportion of people that were not economically active or unemployed when they filed for divorce, and also a large proportion of people that fall under the category of professional, semi-professional, and technical occupations. So this brings me to another note on proportionality. So does this mean that professionals tend to get divorced more, or is this simply a reflection of the fact that there are more professionals in the population and thus inevitably a larger proportion of the divorces will be, professionals and semi-professionals? So yeah, that's also an interesting question, because is this table more a reflection of the actual occupational distribution of the population, or are some occupations more disproportionately likely to lead to divorce? Okay. And in terms of median age of divorces by sex and population group in 2022, here I'm just going to look at the median age for everyone. So for male divorcees, it's 46, and for female divorcees is 42. So the gap isn't really too different from the gap at time of marriage. Okay. And yeah, we do have some stats on duration of marriages, of divorcing couples. Most seem to sit around the 5 to 9 year mark, as well as the 10 to 14 year mark, with odds of divorce, or not necessarily odds, but proportionality of the divorces dropping off from there. Here's another surprise. So the number of divorces in 2022 that involved children, divorces involving children were 55.3% of the case, and 44.7% were divorces not involving children under the age of 18. That was also a bit of a surprise to me. I would have expected a far larger proportion of divorces to involve children. Yes, the majority do involve children at 55.3%, but I personally expected that to be far higher. Just some final comments on the report and the data. My first point is on proportionality. So the report has some very good absolute numbers, but one always has to be cognizant of the proportionality of these numbers when reading the report. So, for instance, considering the breakdown of marriages by province. Now, certain provinces have more civil marriages than other provinces, but when reading this, one always has to keep in mind whether this means that the provinces with uh, more marriages are actually provinces where people are getting married more, or provinces which just so happen to have more people. So is this truly a reflection of more marriages, or a reflection of simply the population distribution amongst the provinces? So in this case, a bit of side by side comparison, or a per thousand crude rate type of number next to the absolute numbers would be helpful, but that's just something one needs to keep in mind. The crude rate was presented, I think, in two cases: the crude marriage rate and the crude divorce rate by population group. And that was also a very interesting point, because intuitively one always wants to have a percentage number when thinking about rates, and this is I found to be just a reminder that certain pieces of data, or the nature of certain data, don't really lend themselves to calculating a percentage rate. And in this case, I think the crude rate was basically the best you can do for marriages and divorces, because they're constantly changing. And as well as to that point, we have the issue with the civil unions, the whole spouse one, spouse two breakdown. I wasn't sure whether that was a meaningful variable to split the data on. Looking at the report as a whole, the data is quite consistently cut on or grouped by province and age group. So that's quite nice. So both the marriages section and the divorce section splits data by those two variables. Well, what's quite strange is that the divorce section suddenly starts grouping data by population group, whereas the marriages section didn't. So I thought it would be quite nice to actually have the by population group breakdown for the marriages section, so as to be able to do a kind of comparison there. But otherwise, this was a pretty informative, interesting report with some surprises along the way. And yeah, thanks for listening.